Nintendo has a long history with their handheld gaming consoles. Most have been the preferred portable systems during their respective runs. From the Game & Watch all the way to the current Switch, Nintendo has provided quality gaming on the go. Here's a look at the evolution of the middle section of that history, focusing on their portables that carry the name Game Boy. In 1989, Nintendo made available what would become one of the most iconic systems they would ever make. They released the Game Boy. It ran off 4 AA batteries and sported an unlit green screen. The key feature of this portable was the introduction of the game slot that used interchangeable game cartridges. In contrast to the Game & Watch, which is what the Game Boy was replacing, that played a single game per system. This completely changed the way Nintendo handled their portable gaming business. No longer were control layouts custom tailored to specific games. Instead, a universal control scheme was designed. That meant games now had to consider these controls when they were being developed. You would think that this would be a giant hindrance. However, it was the contrary. Games thrived with the minimal controls available. They took note from their home console market, which had introduced this idea almost 4 years earlier. Instead of making a new system for every game, they could sell a single console and continually sell games for it. The iconic green and yellow screen was totally different than the Game & Watch screens. Not only does it have a contrast dial, but it doesn't only display still images that turn on and off to portray movement. These sprites actually move and look great doing it. Sure, the blur that happens when something moves on the screen is pretty bad, but we didn't know that back then. Playing a full Mario game on the go, now that was a way to pass the time. The Game Boy has many great titles: Super Mario Land 1 and 2, Metroid 2, and Link's Awakening, to name a few. But the Game Boy didn't just offer first-party games. It also had games that were made by other game developers. The Game Boy really helped broaden the spectrum of gameplay that was available. As mentioned earlier, the screen is not lit, which would become common for Nintendo handhelds. This meant that you could only play this in optimal light. Most Game Boy owners would use third-party lights that would help them play in the dark. Though not optimal, they got the job done. A few years into the lifetime of the Game Boy, Nintendo decided to crank up the intensity and released a Game Boy model in different colors. They called it the Play It Loud series of consoles. This added a splash of color on the console shell, but kept the system the same otherwise. In 1996, Nintendo released a revised version of the Game Boy called the Gameboy Pocket. This was a console revision, not a brand new console itself. It only plays original Game Boy games. The console was considerably smaller and thinner, hence the Pocket name. This was a big change as it was no longer a giant brick. It also ran on 2 AAA batteries, which was a massive upgrade over the 4 AA's the original Game Boy used. The biggest change came with a new screen. Out were the green and yellow colors. It still has a slight green tint, but it's much closer to black and white. This was a preferred color change for many Game Boy owners. It also minimized the blur that occurred when movement was on the screen, which was also a big upgrade over the original. Although it's also not lit, meaning it still needs optimal external lighting to be played. The Game Boy Pocket played the same games as its predecessor, meaning you didn't need this console to play the newest games. You could still play new releases on the original Game Boy. The Game Boy Pocket added desired revisions to the original Game Boy design. Though it wasn't a huge leap forward, it was absolutely an upgrade from its predecessor. 1998 brought a much bigger change to the Game Boy family. This Game Boy had similar dimensions to the Game Boy Pocket, but added a few new curves. It's also a very comfortable console to play. It uses AA batteries, but only 2, which is very reasonable considering what this console brings to the table. It's the first Nintendo handheld that plays games in, you guessed it, color. This doesn't seem like a very big deal today, but it was a significant feature added to a handheld console. Considering that every other Nintendo handheld had only displayed monochromatic colors, this was a giant game changer. The Game Boy Color is often referred to as being a console revision, as in, it isn't considered a brand new console generation, kind of like a half step up from the current console. Though I've always had trouble believing that. Why? Because there's a whole library of games that are only playable on the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy logo was also changed on the sides of the boxes, and they used newly designed cartridges that were only compatible with the Game Boy Color. If that's not a new console, I'm not sure what to think. To me, it's the next generation for Nintendo handhelds. The Game Boy Color was truly a great console. It not only plays Game Boy Color games, it's also backwards compatible with original Game Boy games. This is huge. You don't have to use your old Game Boy to play your original games. You could carry around one console and bring all your Game Boy games with you. But it also added a feature that was really innovative and turned those old games into something new. It would display those old games in color. Basic colors, but color nonetheless. They also gave you the option to change the color palettes by pressing the D-pad in various directions, or a combination of D-pad directional presses with A or B. This was absolutely astonishing at the time. It breathed new life into those old games. If you didn't like the color options, you could display the games in true black and white. This handheld gave consumers all the flexibility in the world. If you like color, great. If you don't like color, great. Do you still like your old games? Perfect. It's a perfect Game Boy in every sense of the word, except for one glaring issue: the screen. It also isn't lit. Again, you have to rely on outside sources for light. If you think about it, it's a massive hindrance for a handheld. You can only play it when light is available. If it weren't for this humongous omission, I think the Game Boy Color would have gone down as one of the greatest handhelds of all time. Now it's considered a slightly better version of the Game Boy Pocket. Nothing more, nothing less. The successor to the Game Boy Color was so technically superior, they gave it a name to reflect that superiority. They decided to call it the Game Boy Advance. Nintendo really changed things up with this portable. Instead of being an 8-bit handheld, this is a 32-bit console. That's 4 times the bits. That's the same amount of bits the PlayStation had. I'm not sure what bits are or what they do, but the one thing the console wars taught me, the more bits it has, the better it is. The games on this thing look amazing. Many have described the GBA as a portable Super Nintendo, and it has some of the best SNES games for it. The biggest change came with the form factor. It's now in landscape mode. Gone were the days of portrait mode. For now, anyway. It's ultra comfortable. Having the buttons on either side of the screen felt like a step forward. The form factor of the games also changed to be much shorter, which looked more modern and took up less space. The screen displays significantly more colors than the Game Boy Color, which is apparent immediately. The level of detail jumped drastically with this handheld, but it also featured the backwards compatibility the Game Boy Color had. It can play all Game Boy titles. It also retains the color palettes from the Game Boy Color. This was very important for people who still like to play their favorite Game Boy games. You can play all of them on the GBA. The Game Boy Advance is a perfect portable system. The form factor is comfortable and compact, but there's one problem with it, and I'm sure you've already guessed what it is. Nintendo still didn't make the screen lit. It released in 2001. Sega had a backlit screen on the Game Gear 11 years earlier. This screen is also surprisingly dark. Having to again rely on outside light sources is a spirit killer. The box is so deceiving. It really looked as if it were backlit. If you want my thoughts on this console, I've made a video about it. I put a link in the description. Nintendo knew that this non-lit handheld needed a revision, which is why they made that revision 2 years later. The Game Boy Advance SP is a Game Boy Advance with a massive upgrade, one that would finally give people with Game Boy games something to rejoice over. The screen is lit. Just front lit, but that's okay. It still had a screen that could light itself. This was, and still is, huge. You could finally play Game Boy Advance games with a lit screen, which also meant that you could finally play original Game Boy games with a lit screen. Though, you could have played them on a Super Game Boy, but I covered that in a different video. Nintendo didn't stop revising with the screen only. They also changed the form factor. It went back to the old portrait style mode, which cramped up the console controls, But they did this to add one of the most innovative console designs that they would ever come up with. It could now fold up, literally taking up half the space it originally occupied. This design protected the screens and buttons from unnecessary wear. They also added a rechargeable battery, which revolutionized the Game Boy maybe even more than the lit screen. You didn't need to pack around a bag of batteries, but that also meant that you couldn't just replace them if the Game Boy died. Although the battery lasted at least 7 hours, which is phenomenal compared to what we have now. The headphone jack was also removed to save space. If you wanted to use headphones, you needed to buy an adapter that plugs into the charging port. Not an ideal solution, but at least we could still use headphones with it. After a year of the GBA SP being on the shelf, Nintendo launched what they called a third pillar to their gaming consoles. They named it the DS. It took the design of the GBA SP and improved upon it. We're going to get into this in another video, so I won't say much, but it is worth mentioning because the DS and DS Lite both play Game Boy Advance games. They both have Game Boy Advance slots on the bottom of the consoles that only play Game Boy Advance games. In 2005, Nintendo released an updated version of the Game Boy Advance SP known today as the AGS 101. It has all the great features of the SP, but they upgraded the most important aspect of the system. The screen was now properly backlit. Finally, a Game Boy with a backlit screen. Replaying all the great games with this display is perfection. It took until 2005 to finally get it right, but they hit the mark with this edition. And this Game Boy is backwards compatible, meaning you can still get that glorious image for all your Game Boy games. The AGS 101 is the definitive Game Boy. Also in 2005, Nintendo released a tiny Game Boy console called the Game Boy Micro. This little Game Boy is really a Game Boy Advance because it only plays Game Boy Advance games. It's not compatible with Game Boy Color or original Game Boy games. This console is very small. It's perfect if you want to carry a game system wherever you go. It's the most modern and sleek Game Boy ever produced. The Game Boy Micro has a premium feel and look, and it also has a headphone jack. If this has a headphone jack, I'm sure they could have included one on the Game Boy Advance SP. It features a tiny screen that is actually quite good. Another feature of the system is the removable faceplates. You could swap them out and create a custom-looking system. This would be the final console to carry the Game Boy name. An odd end to a legendary line of portable systems, but fitting that it's a premium console. The Game Boy family of systems had a great run. It went on for almost 20 years. Most have been the preferred portable systems during their respective runs. From the Game & Watch all the way to the current Switch, Nintendo has provided quality gaming on the go. And the Game Boy line was quality supreme.